This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular, advance your lean journey, and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Hey, good day, everybody. It's Dick Beyer with the podcast for leanconstructionblog.com. With me today is a woman that I have known for, it's got to be 15 years, really, since the beginning of my time and Dan Faucher's time at CPR and on into all the stuff that we've done with Southland over the many years. Jessica Kelley, who is no longer with Southland, but has the high distinction of being recommended to the podcast, not only by the list that I had created, but Iris Tomaline said, "Oh, you've got to talk to Jessica." So right after Iris's podcast, we're here with Jessica, and I'm so pleased to have you. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, another beautiful day. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, where it snowed 2.5 inches in a half an hour. So one of those wonderful places to be.
I'm in Pennsylvania, where I'm jealous because I don't think winter came this year at all.
Really?
We've missed. Oh. I think we may have accumulated maybe 2.5 inches all year.
Wow. Well, in Ottawa, they have a UNESCO World Heritage site that's a 9.5 kilometer canal. And usually it freezes over in the winter. And on a Sunday, you'll have 100,000 people skating on the canal, which is just phenomenal. But they haven't opened it this year, despite the fact that we had a couple of days at 49 below. It's just been too weird. But we've had more snow than ever, so it's been crazy. But enough about geography. Or speaking of geography,
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you grew up, how you got to where you got.
Okay. So I'm kind of back to my roots. I am in the house that I grew up in. It's also the house that my mom grew up in. And my 2-year-old son is now the 4th generation to live in this house.
That's fantastic.
In this farmhouse. So I, first couple of years of my life, we were in another house. My grandparents were still here. When they moved out, we moved in. And it's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley.
Bless you.
Yes, exactly. Despite that, I realized what is Iris's upbringing as a secular humanist.
Yes.
I had to do some research on that, and I think I fall in that same category. I didn't realize there was a name for it.
I was trying to call her. I was trying to call her the high priestess of lean, and she said that was a contradiction to her secular humanism. So we had to call her the Grande Dame.
There you go.
Which fit in with that secular humanism.
Yeah. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and let's see, you're probably gonna want to link this to a little bit of how I got to where I am. So grandfather was a civil engineer. Taught at Lehigh, was a civil engineer for the city of Bethlehem for many years. My dad came out of college with a poli-sci degree. So, highly fascinating education, not so valuable on the market for income when you have a young child on the way. So he got a job working at what I believe was at the time Bell Labs, doing in-house electrical, and stayed there pretty much his whole career through all the transitions of a year in Avaya and Lucent and Bell Atlantic, I think, AT&T, all of them. It just got spun off and spun off and spun off. And my uncle was well-respected, high-end residential contractor. So a lot of construction and engineering in the family. And I was looking at career paths and places to go. I wanted to go to a big school. I wanted everything about that collegiate atmosphere. And found out through my guidance counselor that Penn State had an architectural engineering program. I loved architecture in the built environment. I didn't know it was called that at the time. I also was not of the creative mind that I thought I would succeed as an architect. So when I found that there was an architectural engineering program, everything kind of fell together. It made sense to me. I applied. I got in before any other college applications were due. So I said yes. So that probably speaks to my lean background. Innate thinking is why fill out more applications. I found a great school that met the criteria I was looking for.
That's fantastic. So you became part of Victor Sanvito's flock.
Sort of.
Have populated LCI and the lean community between Mark Concher and Catherine Copeland and Bevan Mace and all of these Penn Staters.
Yes and no. I did. So the Penn State program has different emphasis. Victor ran the construction management emphasis while I was there. I chose the mechanical construction direction, mechanical design direction, with the thinking that I could learn construction management on the job, but design and engineering was harder. So to all those that went the CM program, and they brought some fascinating and thought-provoking thinking. So I can't push back now. Yeah, but during that time, I was in charge of recruiting from the student side, and Southland Industries came to recruit at Penn State. And my colleague on the CM side said, no one signed up to go look at them and meet them. Can you just grab a couple people, because apparently they're good and they hire great people, and there's no one from the mechanical design side showing up. So I grabbed a bunch of my friends and said, just help me out. Let's do a good showing. And I want to say 7 of us ended up going to Southland that year. So that had the little bit of Victor's influence from behind the scenes.
Fantastic.
And yeah, so I interned with Southland and really liked design build. It made logical sense to me. And I moved some pretty much sight unseen to California, eventually San Francisco for Southland. Wanted to live on the West Coast and do the cross-country road trips and all those things.
Awesome. Yeah, I was being a Colorado guy and going to school in Vermont. I was in those cross-country road trips a lot. It taught me that I could sleep anywhere, actually. Yeah. After some point. Well, it's funny because Christian Piquel, he's not a Penn Stater, but he is a Carnegie Mellon guy, and he ended up with Southland as well. So there's something about the
he and
water
I worked together.
Yeah, something about the water in Pennsylvania, I think, that drives people there.
Yes, yeah. He and I worked together in his early years at Southland.
Fantastic. Okay, so you started at Southland. You started in mechanical design on the design side?
Nope. When realized I liked engineering, but I liked project management better. I had an earlier internship at a consulting engineering firm and realized I didn't like being behind the computer the whole time. I wanted to be out seeing how things were being put together. I think that's a lot of the family background. And so design build made perfect sense. You can bring that engineering mindset straight to the field. So I started in project management, and and was highly encouraged. An early boss, Rick Blazier, I think now the COO of Southland, was very deliberate in wanting engineers who did project management work, that we could be more well-rounded in our solutions for our owners and our customers, and helping to kind of design things on the fly in solution and figure out the problems without having to hand off through the engineering department. So he encouraged me to do more engineering work on my projects. So there was a couple projects that actually designed and then took through the construction side.
Awesome. So Southland, being a design build firm, didn't always have design build project delivery processes, right? They were involved in implementation on one side, they were involved in design sometimes. Has delivered projects both as just a mechanical contractor and as a designer. And I know that they had some come to Bethlehem meeting at some point where they said, we should just really concentrate on design build because that's what we're really good at. So what experience did you have in delivering projects that you thought maybe there's a better way of doing it? Were you ever stuck on any terrible projects where you thought, whoa?
Yeah. My first project I came in was a semiconductor plan and spec. And awful. There was, I think there was another one, it was actually design build. Also awful. It was when you work for an owner who doesn't respect your input and value, and it was just very contentious work environment. Lots of plan and spec projects where the runaround on RFIs and trying to explain that whatever was in the drawing just wasn't physically going to work. I had a situation one time where the design engineer drew the ductwork in the corridor, and there was a small duct coming in and then a larger duct, and they were stacked, and he just put, squiggly lines to show the continuation, and then drew the other one in the squiggly lines. And when we leveled it out, we're like, you have a 5-foot corridor here because there's so much ductwork stacked on top of each other, but it fit fine in the drawing. And the back and forth that we would go through recommending ideas and solutions, and they got reworded 100 times. Yeah, it is painful and frustrating, and bang your head against a wall. I was fortunate. I was up in the Northern California region when Rick came on board. He was already doing design build from his previous organization. He pushed us in that direction and really pushed the organization to do better design build, more integrated design build. Like I said, having engineers working on the project, figuring it out.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the things that we lack in Canada is a bevy of design build. There's very few design build trade contractors up here. There's some that are trying it, but they still, I haven't found one yet that stamps the drawings and installs at the same time, which is really hard for our lean projects because we settle back into that, 19 steps of the RFI in 4 weeks to figure out that the hanger can move over a 1/4 of an inch to make room for some conduit or something.
Yeah, and I would say the Bay Area was really fortunate. I think a lot about, all of us who've been in this space for a while, we think about the system and the environment and what enabled success. And I think we owe a lot to the semiconductor industry that was going so fast and having get speed to market, where they often joked about build design. You just had to get it installed. And it built up, because the other aspect we don't give enough credit to is the trade, the foreman, the general foreman, the field level knowledge that makes design build successful. And really thinking about the constructability aspect of it. And the foreman that we worked with that came out of this semiconductor space really understood how to take the design, the last, 15%, 10%, the final distribution of it, and they could do it in the field. They just talked to the engineer about what are the parameters. So that really enabled design build to happen, so that, the confluence of efforts that all came together in that space when Sutter was ready to go really made it successful.
Yeah, it's funny when you do an IPD project, for instance, you find that the trades finish the last 15% of the work because it just goes into shop drawings that are seamlessly installed, and there's very little back and forth about it. It's like, you finish this. And I remember working at Brown University on their engineering building, and the mechanical trade was going, okay, I understand you want to stop designing soon, but come on, you only give me a 30% design and you want me to do the rest. And he went, well, can you? And actually, they sat together and actually, finalized the design, which I think is one of the great things about the collaborative nature of that delivery model.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Bay Area, I know at the University of California in San Francisco with Michael Bidet and Stuart Ekblad and those guys, they were doing design build model, DBIA model, where the delivery team was really more like an IPD team, where they were sharing risk and reward, and they were doing all those, kind of crazy things. Did you ever work with that team? Those projects?
Not directly. By the time we were doing UCSF work, I was probably deep into Sutter and then transitioning out of project management.
Okay. And then you moved into, so you were very instrumental in the kickoff of the community of practice up in Northern California, and how it started. Your energy was all over that thing. Tell us a little bit about, it's always been amazing to me that LCI, that Greg and Glenn or somebody stumbled on the idea that rather than having a chapter of something, why don't we get a bunch of people to do the same thing and get them chatting about it on a regular basis? So tell us a little bit about how that COP, which I think is clearly the most successful one that was been in LCI and the oldest one.
Yep.
That came about.
Yeah, in the early days, kind of teaming off of some of the conversations you had with Will Lichtig on where Sutter was trying to go and solving the problems, and then with Iris and the P2SL. Before there was a community of practice, we had a lean commuter conference. And it was designed around that. How many people can you feed with 2 pizzas? And each meeting, someone else paid for the pizzas, and we would talk about different topics. And I got brought in, Scott Muxon was with Southland at the time, and he started encouraging me to show up every so often when there were good topics. And I got more involved, and it was a really cool environment to be in a room with people of all levels. And I was young. I was probably 3 to 5 years in my career, 4 years, and talking openly about the challenges.
It's just like 4 years ago.
Yes, I wish. Yeah, and so then it eventually evolved to LCI. We kind of like merged forces and became the first community of practice. And about when that happened, maybe a little bit after, George Zettel was with Turner and Dean Reed was involved, and there was a whole bunch of people that were heavily engaged in it. And somewhere around 2007, I was definitely on the Cathedral Hill Hospital project at the time. George said he had to step away. I think it was when he was moving down to San Diego or Temecula. He was going out to help Temecula project or one of those, and he was leaving. And when he left, everyone who was a part of organizing the COP at that time, he's like, asked me if I wanted to lead it up, and it was a great leadership opportunity for me. And so I said yes. And then like the next month, everyone else that was on that leadership group, that core group, said, oh, I've got other plans. I've got this, I've got that. I'm going to encourage this person. And I had a brand new team that had never done it before.
Wow.
Hadn't been involved in planning. And we joke about this a lot of times, the concept of lean by lazy. People who figure out the most efficient way to do things and not recreate the wheel because they don't want to spend their time doing it that way. And that's kind of my approach to the early days of the COP. I was like, we're not going through this again. We need succession planning. We need commitments from people. We can't have everyone. Now we're having a whole bunch of people start at the same time. You can't all phase off at the same time. We're going to stagger this. You're making a commitment. And we started creating standard work around running the COP and having roles and responsibilities. And it was I'll give you a little bit of background, like, where you come from. I've heard enough of this on the podcast. So growing up, my dad was passionate about hot air balloons, fascinated by them. Huh. And sometime in my early days, probably like 6, 7 years old, he got connected with someone and decided to go get his hot air balloon pilot's license. And this ended up being a family hobby. I spent most of my childhood at balloon festivals, flying balloons, crewing for balloons, chasing balloons.
Wow.
It took me to Ottawa.
Beautiful.
We did a festival in Ottawa and in Montreal for many years. And I eventually got my pilot's license, and I was at 16, same as a fixed wing pilot. And here I am, 16-year-old female, in charge of a very expensive and risky aircraft. And I had adults crewing for me and helping me inflate the balloon and flying it. And a lot of times they were other pilots that had knowledge and skill and probably more experience than me or my lifetime in total. Yet I was the one in charge. It all falls on me. If something goes wrong, I'm the pilot. And I was the responsible person. And so I had to have some tough conversations with folks. And I liken that to the community of practice days, where I had to have tough conversations with people that were senior to me in my own organization or in other organizations or client organizations, and saying, if you're not committing to this effort, then don't. Go find someone else. We don't have time for people on this core team who aren't going to contribute. And
that's funny, especially the balloon thing. Last summer, I'm playing golf, and a balloon from the Gatineau Balloon Festival comes down in the golf course. And they're trying to keep it afloat enough just to get it over the trees. And I'm going, oh my God, this is just so crazy and bizarre. I felt like I was in in Oz, and Oz had just taken off, and it was nuts. So wow, what a responsibility to keep those things afloat. I've never been in one, so maybe you can take me up sometime when I'm in Pennsylvania.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's funny because George Zettel he was my first introduction to lean at a Marriott or something in Fairfield.
Yep.
The COP was going on, and Howell had grabbed me and Fauché and threw us into his car and said, let's go down to, and maybe Bill Proctor, and let's go down to this thing. This could be kind of fun. And George was running around like a wild man, and he was so full of energy. So I can imagine that taking that over after him and having complete neophytes on the board, because that thing that was cooking. There must have been 80 people at that dinner.
We were averaging close to 150, 200 for a while in the heyday.
Wow.
And then we had this struggle because, like you said, we were doing it in Fairfield. And for people who don't know the geography, Fairfield's about an hour and a half away from everywhere, except Fairfield. We had the first IFOA contract was for Sutter Fairfield.
Right.
And that was the project that I got put on, I think, because no one else in the company wanted to drive there or do it. But it was a great learning bed because it was the first IFOA contract ever. And then we had people coming from Sacramento and people coming from the Bay Area. It was a 2-hour commute to a community of practice event, no matter where you were, except for we were working on the Fairfield project.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's cool. So that was your first IPD adventure.
Yep.
And so how did that go? What was as you went into it, was Will there explaining things about the contract, or was it one of those things where you said, we finally have a contract, we don't have to worry about it because we all have to actually just do this together?
Yeah, I would say some of my takeaways of that, Will, he must have introduced it, but it's not one of the key memories. I definitely remember we did a study action on the contract itself. We had Rosendin on the project, Bolt, Sutter, HGA, I believe. I always get my H architects.
Yeah, there's so many H's.
With Bonnie Walker and Stan Chu. Thank you. And so we did study action on the contract and what does this mean and how is it going to work and how is it going to apply? And then we're having those conversations internally within our own organization. What does this mean? How does it apply? What are the rules of the road here? So that was the first time I ever done that. Dave Kiewit was the executive. He was with Bolt, but he's still back in Appleton, came out and took us all out to a really nice restaurant in Napa. Not like French Laundry nice, but still good food.
Auberge de Soleil or something like that. Right?
It wasn't Auberge either. It had a bay leaf. It was such a cool restaurant. They had their own farm and they had their custom dishes and it was a really cool experience. But he took us out to dinner in the early stages of the project to get to know each other and to meet outside of the project work.
Nice.
And probably the first foray into this is a team. We're going to be successful in this if we're together. And it's rare that even design build contractors, it's rare that we got involved with the owner and that the GC cared about us at all on projects. You're hired guns and usually brought for your manpower, not your brains, not your thoughts and solutions. So that was initially a shift. That was a huge eye-opening curve. And then I remember something happened that happens on a lot of projects. We were doing design build. I was doing the estimating in red lines before we had, the conceptual estimating before you had anything to really take off. And when we eventually had a full set of drawings, we had a bust. We had not enough money for the reheat piping. And I went to, testing names, Mike, Mike something, he was with Bull, he was the project director. And I said, hey, we have this bust and I can't figure out how to pull it out. And he brought us all together and said, all right, collectively, we have a problem. We have an issue. Architect, IT, with Sutter there, the electrician, everyone, how do we get ourselves out of it? He did his due diligence with me to say, are there any more skeletons in the closet? Are we sure we've got everything? We've done everything you need to do. And we solved the problem. And the long story or shorter is we ended up having this ripple effect of the reheat piping was what the reheat piping was. But when we were looking at things we could solve, there was 2 IDF closets. Said if we can make that 1 IDF closet, then instead of 2 fan coils per floor, I think we were a 3-story building at the time, we could do 1 air handler on the roof and just feed straight down through the IDF closets. Way less expensive. And as we're talking about that, the electrician said, well, if you're going vertical, we can go vertical. Much easier for us for feeding the closet. And the IT person had to run all the cable. And he said, well, right now everything's in cable hangers. If we go in cable tray, we can actually get the distance we need from the IDF closet. So that's going to be a little bit more money than what we had planned. And in order to get that right spot, we had to bump out the building. We were in a greenfield site. We had space, but it was going to take a little bit more, brickwork and structural and all the architectural feature elements of it. We all came together, ended up being a major, more of a cost savings than the actual impact of the reheat piping. And wow. That showed me what collaboration was. It gave me trust in the team. And there, years later, the center, we were working with the Center for Creative Leadership, and they gave me this example, what I now refer to as the culture triangle. And it says, if you want different results, people need to behave differently. But you can't tell people to behave differently if it's counter to what their beliefs are and their values. You can't tell them to believe differently if it's different than what their experiences are. So you need to give people a new experience. And that experience I had a ripple effect through the project. It gave me the comfort to talk to my foreman about trusting our partners outside, and that they can trust them. They can start, stretching a little, getting a little bit more risky in that safe space and testing it. And they had my encouragement and confidence to go forward with that. And I think that was huge for the environment of the project and the team culture. And the project ended up coming in significantly under budget with a lot of added value put back into the project. It survived a major change at what would traditionally be considered, 60, 90% DD. There became a discussion of whether we should have 2 or 3 stories in the building. We ended up with 1 story less and a remodel of an existing building to be a part of the project effort. So it hit the mark on all levels of, it was an enjoyable team to work with. You wanted to work with them again. Everyone came out of it with a fair profit or with added value from the owner perspective. It was a great learning curve. And then I think I went to Cathedral Hill Hospital right after that to do the validation of what was eventually a $2 billion program. And then shortly after that, I went to design build, which used to be good. I used to love design build, and I was pulling my hair out with it went from seeing a better way, and then going back to what was originally considered the best way, and
Right.
realizing it wasn't good at all.
Well,
It was
because
good waste.
there's that old command and control. I mean, I think one of the biggest shifts that I see on these projects is when a CM starts respecting the trades rather than just thinking that they're, you know, innocent children to be to be cajoled and pushed along. Magic stuff happens because it's not how the paradigm was set up, and yet the CM doesn't do any work on the job. I mean, your trades are your hands and your feet, and if you, it always seems so funny to me that there's been that divide between trades and general contractors, because once general contractors stop doing work, whether it's concrete or carpentry or millwork or all the stuff, drywall, the stuff that they used to do, I think they had to reinvent their value proposition, and the value proposition is being servant leadership to the trades to enable them to get work done.
Yeah.
And you don't see that often on projects.
Not enough.
That don't have that, at least their contracts aligned, so everything is suffered. I'm on a project right now at Humber College in Toronto, and it's a great project. It's a cultural hub. So there's 12 different buildings. They're building, we're building a CLT residence on top of a steel and cement auditorium, and it just, the structural intricacies of that are interesting because the grids can't be anywhere close to the same unless you just collapse the steel grid to 9 meters or whatever, which wouldn't make much sense for anybody.
Right.
And the owner came in one day after they discovered a $200,000 problem with a water connection, and he was smiling, and everybody said, "What are you smiling about? This is a big problem." And he said, "I'm so happy. If this was a different project, it would be my problem. Today it's our problem." And I love that. And getting the collective heads together to be thinking about that, so that you take up, and I've been thinking a lot about contracts lately, and the idea that the relational contract essentially does away with bilateral contracts. And just that one piece, just that one thing, that you're all in the same contract, and you don't have a contractual axe to grind against it. There's not a battle to win against somebody else. Really changes perceptions once that light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
It doesn't go on too quickly. It's not like the refrigerator. It doesn't go on as soon as you open it.
No, it's true. And I think a lot about, what is that silver bullet that really just shifts everything. And having gone through the IPD experience and the IFOA experience, it's the closest thing I can come to. And the other thing I appreciated is talking with James Peace that got me to, see it this way, because he was on it from the owner's perspective the whole time, is you stop putting your energy towards protecting yourself or advocating your position, and you can put all of that energy, which we have in a finite amount always, you can put that towards solving the problem, because you're going to come out of this hole. You're going to at least you're not going to lose your business over it.
Right.
So now it gives you more opportunity and more ability to stretch, and then also take risks by sharing them. You're now taking risks, and you're sharing what you're thinking of doing, what you think can be achieved by it. And I think to that point, and that end of what we were talking about earlier, of like, why don't we listen to the trades, and why don't we have more design build partners? During my days as running a learning and development department, we learned about the people need the mindset of doing something. They need some knowledge around it, and they need to be skilled. And those are 3 different things you have to focus on developing for people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because people they might have a mindset for design build, but they haven't been practiced at it. They might have all the knowledge there to do it. They understand the trades. You got engineers who understand the design. You got people who understand the constructability, but they haven't been skilled in doing it. So you need to give them some time to practice those skills. Or when Last Planner came into play, and in the early years, our foremen were never asked how long something should take, because they were always being given a schedule by the CM. You could not say it wouldn't work. You could not say no. So you just had to accept it and then just do your best. And whatever happened, happened. And there was no data around, no measuring of it, no tracking of it. So sometimes you were right, sometimes you were wrong, sometimes you fought, sometimes they were complaining about someone else. So you were out of the spotlight and you moved along forward. And it takes a lot, but we have to have some patience in the development of the skill sets for people.
I think this is very much in line with Daniel Pink's intrinsic value idea, where you have to have some, mastery over sign. You have to feel competent that you can do a job. You have to know how to hang drywall, or you have to know how to hang ductwork. And then you have to have some autonomy. You have to be able to figure out these problems on your own, rather than being told either by a schedule or by a superintendent or by somebody else, do it this way. A general would never tell a squad of soldiers how to take out a machine gun nest, right? I mean, they just
I would hope
do
not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been brought up in the military.
Not these days, I'm thinking. Well, what I know about it these days is no, that doesn't happen. So you need those two things, and then you need the kind of the inspiration of the team, right? That this is good work, that you're doing something productive, so that you can look back on it. And I always thought, after reading Drive 15 years ago, it's still the first book I recommend to everybody. Although there is this new book that I may be recommending to people. How Big Things Get Done. This is Ben Flyberg.
Okay.
Who's the world's expert on mega projects. I don't know if you know about him. He's the dean of the Said School at Oxford. It's so funny because he talks about exactly everything that we talk about. And we talk about everything that he talks about, but he never mentions lean there. And we hardly ever talk about, mega projects and stuff like that. There was an article in the New York Times. Ezra Klein came out with an opinion piece a couple of weeks ago on, wow, what's happening to productivity in construction? And these guys at the University of Chicago were trying to figure out what happened to productivity in construction. And I wrote a response to the Times, and of course didn't get published, but said, Paul Techholz knew about this in 1995, Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell and Iris Tomline and Lori Koskela and, our Todd Zabel.
Every single foreman on the job site.
Yes, in addition to every person who's worked on a building since the Empire State Building set the land speed record.
Yeah,
everybody has wondered, why is this so fractured? But it's not because the people, and I think it gets misappropriated, that it's the people who don't know how to do it right and they can't do it. And it's not. It's the system we keep putting them in. Right. Well, and the people who aren't doing it are telling the people who do it how to do it. How crazy is that? I mean, this is a system of backseat driving, right? And so I was thinking about, I'm doing this thing for the Lean Construction blog on how the Last Planner is really the only natural planning system, because it's kind of biomimicry, right? And so I started thinking about biomimicry, and I got into looking at stuff, and it's all about systems.
I've heard the term.
Yeah, and every system has a negative feedback loop, right? So when you're in the trailer with the Last Planner system and that sticky didn't get done on Tuesday, that's a negative feedback loop right there, where the system has to self-correct that day, not at the end of the month, because you've looked at some crazy P6 schedule or CPM schedule. I shouldn't bash the company.
Yeah, it's not premature.
They're only selling. They're only trying to make a little money. Only trying to live in a nice Southern California mansion. But what's funny about that system as well is that CPM never tells you what work you're doing. It gives you a duration for hanging duck in a hallway, but it never says where you are any day. So you can never tell if anybody's making any progress or not. It's just so wacky that we have all these systems that just don't work. And the only place that they ever work is if you're in a completely opaque system where nobody ever sees what's going on. And you can pull all the levers behind the scenes. The Wizard of Oz paid no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right.
And so transparency is the thing that not only kills mold, but it brings light to the fact that none of these systems actually work, right, the way that they want to. So
yeah.
So you moved from Cathedral Hill. Tell us about Cathedral Hill, because that seemed like the largest learning lab ever in the history. I mean, we thought, initially CPR was going to be the big learning lab, but we weren't able to take it into the field. We had to take it into the field as a design build hybrid. And yet I have hanging on the wall back there a plaque from Clark Construction that we did $63 million for the construction in a single month in September of 2012, which is a shload of construction.
Yeah.
By any calculation. But Cathedral Hill was just like, it had every issue you could probably ever have in an urban setting. I mean, San Francisco has 128 codes that are different than any place else in the world. They were afraid that nurses would be, couldn't afford to live in the neighborhood. So there was, a housing component to the hospital. You're building on this hill that ought to be falling into the bay any moment. What a cool place to be.
Adjacent to a county, city, state, national, I believe, federal highway, depending on what level you were on Van Ness or Route 1. There's layers to who owned what. There were, you're right. There was so many levels, and I was only there during pre-construction. I did validation for it and then pre-construction. And, there's probably a little bit of blessing that no one from Sutter CPMC would want to admit to this. The city entitlement slowed the project down. It gave us a lot of opportunity to learn as they were slogging through that. And but there were opinions on, San Francisco is a vocal community. There are opinions on, can a hospital go next to a high-rise residential building, but not so far away that we can't access our health care, but not so close that we want it in our backyard. We want it in our neighborhood. What type of health care needs to be provided here, there, and everywhere in the city. I spoke on the planning committee board meeting one time, and anyone who wanted 2 minutes of talking time and we were there till I think 2, 3 in the morning, talking to people and
amazing,
sharing. But yeah, we got to test, and I think that's where we really came into, like, leading up to that. We had these new tools, we had a new contract, and we thought all of this was going to work. That's all you needed. And it was the Cathedral Hill Hospital, when we moved from validation to design, design phase pre-construction, or that we learned how important the team dynamic was and the onboarding to a culture. And so we spent a lot of time focused on bringing people on board to the journey and what skill sets and what did they need to learn about it. And eventually you have a strong enough culture that when you bring a couple people in, they just merge in. It's like a school of fish. But in the early days, you don't have that. And I think that's why I work on a lot with my teams now, is how do we set up that culture to be purposeful so that people understand it's a new experience, and we give them a new experience, and we respect them for the role that they're coming into play.
Yeah, so often we seem to lack the resources or the commitment up front, because we're just in the go mood to create the culture, spend the time on the team building, spend the time on understanding how people work together. And collaboration turns into this 45 people in the big room clicking along at, $8,000 an hour, considering one problem at a time, rather than dissolving into simultaneous groups that are solving multitudes of problems all at the same time and then coming back into some integrated fashion. And it's just inherent that we have to be able to convince folks that that the money that you spend up front in planning is a huge investment in saving money down the line.
Yeah.
And you had the opportunity to move from, so if I were sitting in your position, I'd be thinking, how can I actually influence these projects to take the time that they need to be able to do stuff? What if I was an owner? So I don't know if that influenced your decision to move to the owner's side, but tell us a little bit about that transition, because I think that's, I'm thinking that the next generation of the built environment is really the owner generation, that they can begin to ask for the things that they want and not settle for the stuff that's available.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you segue? I mean, you and Catherine kind of got on the same caboose and ended up working for big pharma.
Yeah.
Back in your own
hometown. Yes. This crazy thing called a pandemic happened and kind of slowed a lot of stuff down. I was at Southland in San Francisco at the time, and little known, but I decided to have a child on my own. So went through the IVF journey and found out I was pregnant a week before the world shut down.
So you found out on March 6th, 2000.
March 7th, technically.
Oh, okay.
It was my birthday. And
I go right to that Friday the 13th as the day that the world died.
Yes. And so that was a little bit, a lot of change, a little gnarly uneasiness going on many levels. And, eventually, we tried to figure out what was going on. Eventually, there was a furlough with a lot of Southland folks, and started talking to the network and had time to talk to people. And Bill Seed had sent my name to George Cusick over at Merck and said, you might want to talk to this woman. She might be more apt to listening right now. At the same time, Catherine reached out to me and said, hey, Merck's looking to build up their lean delivery group. You might want to look at them. And I had seen Merck at a couple LCI presentations. I was aware they did a project in South San Francisco. So I was aware of what they were doing. Hadn't done any work for large manufacturing pharmaceutical, because that's not what is built in the Bay Area.
Right.
Yeah. Did a lot of small biotech and, small pilot labs, but nothing on that scale. And I started talking to them and agreed, like, to your point, here I am, working for a trade partner and trying to figure out how to influence up in the supply chain, and how to make more of our projects go integrated project delivery. And then this opportunity came around, and Merck's largest facility is about an hour away from where my family was, and their corporate headquarters is about an hour away in a different direction. And I tell George all the time, I'm like, you got me at a somewhat weak moment. We're in a pandemic. I'm a social creature and I can't see anyone. I live by myself. My mom had to cancel her first trip out to see her only daughter pregnant in the early stages of the pregnancy. And, I think in a couple of weeks, I made the decision to uproot everything and take the job at Merck. And they have a very decently sized capital program, and they were invested in delivering it in a lean manner. What it looks like is still designing. We're still working through it. What makes sense for the organization. I was a student of a lot of our owners, Bill Seed in the UHS days, to the Disney days, to Jackson Health, Pixley and David Long and Digby and everyone at Sutter, James at Sutter and UCSF. Like, what are these owners doing? How is it working? How can we apply it elsewhere? And now getting the chance to take it to Merck, I'm learning there's some things that are a little harder than what they were when I asked Sutter, well, how are you allowed to, just shift your contract so easily? And they said, well, procurement didn't, we don't really have a procurement department, and the rest of the organization didn't care what contract we did. They just wanted the building.
Right.
Like, oh, well, that's a little different. So here I am.
Yeah, well, that's funny because I did a lot of consulting with Merck on and off over the years. Al Schwarzkopf and the stuff that he was doing with Kurt and all the rest of that, and it always seemed to me that when the two of my best friends got pulled in there, that was a sign that everybody was going, yeah, we need to really focus in on this because we're just spending too much money on these projects that we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And if there's some better way of doing it, talk to the money. So whether it's good to do, you can do good and you can do well at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think we're kind of continuing that journey and recognizing that just because you have money doesn't mean you should spend the money. And just because you have the time doesn't mean you should use the time. We want to get to market faster. We have to deliver a quality product. George introduced that to me early on in the interviews, is we're making products that might get, injected into a baby's arm. Think about the quality, the outcome of the product and what you're manufacturing. It doesn't get any higher risk in that situation.
Or higher purpose.
Or higher purpose. Right. Or, you throw in the pandemic, and how can we figure out something that is going to prevent so many people from dying and being hospitalized? How do we get people back to being social creatures that we are and making the world be able to be together again? How do you work through R&D faster? How do you make facilities that are flexible as design changes, where the science changes more rapidly than construction does and built environments do?
Right.
So there's lots of challenges, and so we're trying to figure out how do we not reinvent the wheel regularly on certain elements, but how do we save that innovation for where it's needed? How do you I went from working on hospital projects where there was 1 to 5 people that were full-time to the project, to 20 to 30 owners, the process engineers that figure out the guts of the project. We're not moving people through a building anymore. We're moving product through a building that has a uniqueness to it. There's a skill set involved in that. Bringing all those different entities together collectively. So I've spent a lot of the last couple of years really focused on the team dynamic and how do you enable that work to come together and to build those relationships, and that everyone is looking out for each other's best interests. And so that's kind of, that was step one. And then I think next will be how do we get the product we were looking for without spending as much effort and time on things that aren't adding value.
Right.
And it's interesting. So Merck's got a strong foundation in lean manufacturing. So it's great to be able to build off of that. And with lean comes standard work and standards. And one of the challenges we had, and then you add pharmaceutical in here and the purpose and what we're building. And there is a lot of written material on how to deliver work. And sometimes that might get in our way of being lean.
Right. Yeah, I think it's everything started with Taylor and the one best way, right? You can study the one best way and you can document it and you can get it done. But when you have a multitude of sites, a multitude of challenges with a multitude of things that run through it, all of a sudden that one best way doesn't necessarily fit. And it's funny, Flyberg talks about in this new book, he talks about uniqueness bias, that everybody thinks that their project is really unique, when in fact every project shares more characteristics with other like projects than it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a hospital does the same kind of work, whether you're in Tuscaloosa or you're in Nome, and there are a lot of reference points that allow you to assemble that. And one of the things we haven't done very well in design and construction is assemble data about how we have built past projects. And yet I'm certain almost that Merck has assembled data on how they have rolled out everything from aspirin to, polio vaccines. And they access that data when they roll out a new program. So I think that would be a really great challenge to try to integrate that thinking into the built environment while you're keeping kind of the bean counters out of their quarterly performance stuff, when construction is at least a 3-year to 5-year timetable.
Yeah.
And you don't see performance. You don't know the cost or how long it takes to build anything until you're done. Right.
Right.
So I'm really interested now, that was a lot to throw at you at kind of question observation, but how are you working through that? And what have you found to be the most satisfying part of that?
We're chipping away. We've done the investment in getting people thinking about doing projects differently and just building up skill sets around target value delivery, production management thinking, tax scheduling, and how do you make that work, and giving people experiences where they have trust in the process and trust in the system has been huge. Now we're starting to really get into more collaborative big room spaces, taking some of that learning to the work environment. And some of that is coming off of a pandemic where people learn to work from home, and we're able to do some of that successfully. So what's that hybrid look like? And it's funny hearing some of the stories from people like, oh, can we do a big room hybrid? And it's like, oh yeah, years before the pandemic, we had design teams that were all across the world trying to build a hospital, and we figured out how to do a hybrid big room. But then there's things that you collaborate on much better when you have people in person, face to face, talking.
Right.
And then to your point, like trying to pull a lot of stuff, we're testing a lot of things in digital around, whether it's on the modeling side or the model to the construction, and are we getting the quality right? Are we fixing the problems before they become more expensive problems? Are we catching them further upstream, and how do we use digital for that? We're pulling together data models on the cost side, on the delivery side. I am still looking for, and at some point I'll either do the research myself. I keep asking our research partners to do that research around, at the beginning of the project, when you're behind schedule and you're over budget, can you please invest a significant chunk of time and money into developing your team?
Right.
And does that pay off? So, looking at some of those things, and then figuring out what does the model, we're doing some shared incentive structures to align behaviors that way. So, trying a bunch of different things and starting to see successes, and definitely seeing the successes on the team side of it. People coming together and really working collectively.
So one of the things that the Flyberg recommends, and so I sat down and read this book in a day, and I was going, this is everything I've been talking about for like the last 20 years. And I'm not known to this guy from Adam. And he's not known in our community much, even though Howard Ashcraft is an adjunct professor at Oxford under this Said program. One of the things he talks about is you get a team and you just keep that team. Just get that team fired up and move that team everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, if you're an academician, you can say that. Where I work, almost all of the projects that I work on in Canada are in the broader public sector, which means that there is a procurement. There's a competitive aspect to every procurement. And I spend a lot of time trying to talk people down off of the competitive branch, but nonetheless, it's very difficult to get a supply chain. So the only cure for that is to get the supply chain created. So there are people out there that will respond to what you're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys taking steps? I mean, you build all over the world. So you have projects in every kind of culture. for all kinds of reasons. And so are you taking steps in the supply chain? Are you a student of the supply chain, or what are you guys doing to kind of buff it up?
That's part of the new element that got added to my role this fall is supplier relationship management. And Merck uses a panel of partners, and those panels of partners tend to go to the same people. So we've got people who've worked on our West Point site for their whole career. And there's work to keep them busy, which is a big part of keeping that same team going, you know, from one project to the next. So that to a degree that's beneficial because we've got a known group of partners that we're working with. The downside is you've got a known group of partners that you're working with. So injecting new thinking and new competitive thought into it isn't as simple, but you have a set group of people to work with. And then I found it very interesting. We have a lot of work in Ireland, and over there, not just the partners, but even our own employees have bounced around. So they've all worked together in the pharma industry in Ireland, but whether it was with our organization or another one, they all know each other. And so you're starting with a relationship already. You've already got some of that trust built, which is huge. So then it's just a matter of, you know, creating new skill sets and breaking down the barriers of what gets in the way from letting people truly succeed.
I think that's like our biggest challenge. So a couple more questions, and then this has been great. So the first is, you know, we talk about target value delivery. I think we kind of invented target value delivery as a way of talking about projects rather than just target value design when we all got together at that target value design conference. And it's become a buzzword, but I don't think people really understand exactly what it means. What's your definition of target value delivery?
There's a target cost,
right?
And we need to figure out through a variety of levers how to get to that target cost. And ideally that target cost is somewhat justified in, you know, benchmarks or business case need, depending on the organization. It has a stretch to it that makes it a little harder than just a slam dunk, or maybe a lot harder, but not so hard. So I think there's some art. Anyone you talk to who sets target costs, there's an art to that as well as a science, and how to stretch your team. But then it's creating that creative tension to figure out what design solutions are needed, and then also what delivery solutions. Like almost every project, like the design works a lot and the design teams work a lot to figure out how to make the solution work for the target cost. But when you really get the big savings is when you can reduce significant amount of hours by smoothing out the production flow. So that, you know, getting to that delivery side of it.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the secret. The sweet spot is always in labor. It's hardly ever in materials.
Yeah.
I mean, going from tin to marble would be a significant increase, but it's such a small increase compared to the savings that you can get in labor, that it's so funny that we concentrate on that stuff.
Yeah, but I think there's also, like, it gets people thinking creatively on what does design really mean? What aesthetics are important? Where does the value lie? And you start getting people get creative around, well, I can get you this for a lot less now that I understand what is important to you. And I'm doing a construction project at this house right now because we're building out a grandma's wing.
Really?
And yes. And, you know, just figuring out, like, my cousin is my contractor. So, and also my next door neighbor. So, you know, this will either be a huge success or a family failure.
Yeah.
But,
a family, another busted family.
Another busted, so far so good. But we constantly have conversations about what is value, what is important to me. Help me understand what the complexity of something is so we can make a trade-off. And it's all trade-offs. Everything's trade-offs. So we got introduced to the choosing by advantages process on Cathedral Hill. I think I probably came up and talked to you guys at CPR about it. It's a mindset shift around everything is a trade-off. So how do you slice and dice and intricately carve those trade-offs to get that model that works perfectly for that situation?
Well, and I think that's the heart of target value delivery. Actually, I think it is that you create the value proposition that you can't start without a full understanding of what it is that you're really trying to do. And then say, in the world, there's a cost that should be associated with that, and a cost and a time that should be associated with that. If we did everything perfectly, that would be the cost and that would be the time. And how do we set that target as well as setting the target cost? Because the target cost is always above nirvana, right?
Yeah.
But less than expected cost.
I don't think we know where nirvana is. Like,
yeah, I don't think we'll ever get there.
No.
But it's so much fun to try. It doesn't, it's not an excuse.
Closer and closer.
Yeah, it's not an excuse that we can't get there, that we don't try.
It moves.
Right?
It's going to move.
It keeps getting further in the distance.
Yeah, because like you think of all the technology and the new ideas and the whether it's design thinking or products or optimizing labor, I don't think we even know where the frontier really is.
Right.
We're just continuing.
And what's funny is that we focus a lot on, and rightfully so, on flow of tradespeople through a project, so that we get kind of, when you're on a ski slope and suddenly you hit perfect, or you're in a sailboat and you turned up into the wind and now the tiller is just weightless in your hand. Everybody knows what that flow state feels like, and they know that they don't get there very often. And when they get there, they want to stay there. But there's also all this other stuff that's like Kafka and the trial. It's like all of the bureaucracy that goes on, and all of the paperwork, and all the machination of the Martians, wandering through projects, just creating stuff for no reason. So I used to recommend to foremen, after being a litigator for 35 years and seeing how these things blow up, I used to recommend to foremen, don't keep a journal.
Yeah.
And, well, why? I said, well, it only hurts you. I mean, I've used those journals to win cases, and what good does it do for you? It takes you half an hour every day or 45 minutes, and if you and it's only so that somebody else can read it and have oversight, or so that some lawyer can try to protect it. I mean, it's not worth it. Focus on just doing the job. And
spend that time reflecting on what worked, what didn't work, and how do I make it better next time? Much more use of our time than the logs.
I mean, how cool would it be that if you saw a crew of, I was a sheet metal apprentice for 3.5 months, and it made it so clear to me why I needed to go to university and get a tie and a coat and all that stuff. It's hard work. But how cool would it be if you saw a crew? So we talk about our daily huddles. What if there was a plus delta at the end of every day, and people looked back and said, we could have done this a little better, right? We didn't anticipate that tool that we needed, and that cost us a bit of time. What if they just kind of,
Well, and I think the construction industry before my time, I think, had that. It was called having a beer at the end of the day. Now we know that's not a smart, safe thing to do, but that decompression, and out of it comes a little bit of what worked, what didn't work, what do we want to do differently tomorrow.
Well, it's even worse when, superintendents are notorious for driving 2.5 hours to get from where because they don't want to move, and they have a new project and they're 2.5 hours away, and then they have to drive home for 2.5 hours. And so their life is just this entire freaking project. And it's like, wouldn't it be cool if they lived next door, and then they could walk over and have a beer on the front porch with the crew and say, what worked and what didn't work, and how do we get that going? We used to have a process. I mean, just at the time I was a 3-month tin banger, or whatever, hanging gutter. I went out with my foreman and we took out another trade. It was recalcitrant. The electrician was just a pain in the ass on this job. And they did what they called the brown blanket. So they had a couple of beers, and then you went outside to have a smoke, and you wrapped them in a brown blanket, and roughed them up a little bit. And that was an attitude adjustment. And you go, whoa, well, you can't do that these days. But
we need a better way.
Well, and one of the ways is to find the right people to get on the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So getting people to understand that their lives and their fortunes are all hooked up with this same group. And military operations do that in boot camp, where they take you down to wherever, and then, you're coalesced so that you because who's going to fire a gun at somebody unless it's an automatic response,
Yeah.
So that's why I think we call these things lean boot camps or boot camps at all. But we need to find, and I think that you're right, we need to have practiced time in culture where people have time to kind of practice how they should do things. And we should take it as slowly as we can, but build some artifacts around it, build a job logo around it instead of individual logos, and build some language around it instead of the way that, people talk. Anyway.
So that's what we're trying to do.
Pardon me?
And that's what we're trying to do.
So how do you, at the risk of going over another couple of minutes here, which I really appreciate you taking so much time. How do you do that? What are your words of wisdom from the owner's standpoint, saying, we have a value proposition. We know it takes a dedicated team that is culturally fit, culturally equipped to focus on an alignment around this project. What steps do you take to do that?
You need to understand what's important to your customer, to your owner. We say this all the time. What is value to the end owner, for sure, because that's the one that pays all of the paychecks.
Right.
But then your immediate owner, what is value? And then you sometimes have to figure that out. Like there could be a step that's valuable to the next person in line, but not valuable at all to the owner in the long run. So it may not be important to do regardless. You should figure out a way to eliminate it. And then we need people to recognize that unfortunately our current system is broken.
Right.
And there are glimmers, there are elements, but the people are good. The people are talented. And when you unleash that, and when you empower people who have been doing this work for their whole career, whether it's a designer or a foreman, foreperson, a project engineer, a safety professional, they're good. Help them understand what their goal really is. And it's not to push paperwork, it's to accomplish something. Whether it's, we have an impeccable safety rating, and it's a constant discussion. Now we're moving things further and upstream. So it's not just about lost time. Now it's, near misses and tap-ins, and, do we see something that could potentially go wrong? And if we get so many of those, it reduces the amount of actual incidents that happen. So like, what is the leading indicator? Where are the leading efforts? And so the ask to the supply chain is figure out what you do that provides value to your customer, and then figure out how to only do that. And sometimes it's educating the rest of us on the team to say, what you're asking me, I don't think you really need.
Right.
Let's figure this, let's talk this through. Let's see how this is important and gets to the end goal.
Yeah, really empower people to have that conversation, right? Because they don't think that they're naturally empowered to do that. They think that they're supposed to just sit there and take it.
Yeah.
When they have all kinds of really good ideas. I mean, we lose so much by being quiet. So this has been great. Thank you so much, man. The time just flew by, and I think I took more time than I promised you I would. But we did our honking incident, so we got a couple of minutes to edit there. So, thank you so much.
You know me, I'll talk on this for hours.
There you go.
Industry.
Well, that's why you're here. Thanks, Jessica. I really appreciate it. Good luck with that. Good luck with getting those guys going, because we have just found out in the pandemic, how hard it is to respond medically and pharmaceutically, but how when people get aligned around a job that needs to be done, that's saving millions of lives, they really kicked ass. So thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks to Merck and to the rest of the organizations, and thanks for your trying to get them headed in the right direction in terms of building their buildings.
Part of a team.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.